The stars looked beautiful tonight, Captain Jake Morrison thought as he stood on the bridge of the Valiant. But those weren't stars moving toward Earth, those were ships. Enemy ships. 300 of them, all belonging to the Kryn Empire, and they were coming to take humanity's home. Jake had been in the military for 15 years. He had fought in small battles, trained for bigger ones, and always believed that Earth would be safe. But now, looking at the screens showing the massive alien fleet, he knew that safety was just a dream. The Kryn had destroyed 17 other civilizations in the past 3 months. They gave each species the same choice, surrender or die. Most surrendered. Those who didn't were wiped out completely. Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat at her station, her fingers moving across the controls as she counted the enemy ships. Her face was calm, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. "Captain, the numbers don't make sense," she said quietly. "We have 40 ships. They have 300. Even with our best weapons and perfect tactics, we can't win this fight." Jake nodded. She was right, of course. Any military computer would say the same thing. The odds were impossible. Earth's fleet was good, well-trained, and equipped with decent weapons. But the Kryn were better. Their technology was advanced. Their ships were powerful. Their soldiers were experienced. They had conquered world after world, and no one had been able to stop them. Admiral Connor Hayes appeared on the communication screen. He was an old man with gray hair and a face full of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he said. "The Kryn have sent us their message. They want us to surrender. They promise to let most of us live if we give up without a fight. They say resistance is pointless. They say we should be smart and accept reality." Jake waited. Every captain in the fleet was listening. This was the moment that would decide everything. Would humanity surrender like so many others had? Would they try to negotiate? Would they run away and hide somewhere in deep space? The Admiral smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had made a difficult decision and felt good about it. "I have sent them our answer," Hayes said. "I told them no. Just that one word, no, we will not surrender. We will not run. We will not beg for mercy. If they want Earth, they will have to take it from us, and we will make them pay for every inch of space." The communication ended. For a moment the bridge was silent. Then Amy started laughing. It was a strange sound, half crazy and half relieved. "We're really going to do this?" she asked. "We're really going to fight them even though we can't win." Jake looked at his crew. They were all young, most of them in their 20s or 30s. They had families back on Earth. They had dreams and plans for the future. And now they were going to throw all of that away in a battle they couldn't win. It was insane. It was stupid. It was the most illogical thing they could possibly do. "Yes," Jake said, "we're going to fight them. Not because we think we can win, but because we're human, and humans don't give up just because the odds are bad. We fight because it's the right thing to do. We fight because our families are down there on Earth, watching and hoping. We fight because if we surrender without trying, we'll never be able to look at ourselves in the mirror again." Sergeant Danny Walsh was 3 decks below, preparing his Marine squad for a suicide mission. Their job was simple and completely crazy. They would take small breach pods, fly them straight at the enemy flagship, attach to the hull, cut through the metal, and fight their way inside. Then they would battle through thousands of Kryn soldiers to reach the reactor core and blow it up. The computer said their chance of success was less than 1%. Danny checked his weapon one more time. It was a simple rifle, nothing fancy. Humans didn't have energy shields or plasma cannons like the Kryn. They had bullets and explosives and determination. Sometimes that was enough. "Listen up," Danny told his squad. "You all know the mission. You all know the odds. Anyone wants to back out, now's the time. No shame in it. This is volunteer only." Nobody moved. 10 men and women all looking at him with steady eyes. They were scared. Danny could see that. But they weren't backing down. "My grandfather told me something when I was a kid," Danny said. "He fought in a war back on Earth a long time ago. His unit was surrounded by enemies. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Everyone said they should surrender, but they didn't. They fought their way out, and most of them survived. You know what he told me? He said the difference between winning and losing isn't about weapons or numbers. It's about who wants it more. It's about who's willing to take risks that scare everyone else." The breach pods launched. Small, fast, and almost unprotected, they flew toward the Kryn fleet like bullets. The enemy tried to shoot them down. Many pods exploded, their crews dying instantly. But some got through. Danny's pod slammed into the side of the Kryn flagship with a crash that rattled his teeth. The cutting torch burned through the hull in seconds, and then they were inside. The Kryn soldiers were waiting. They were big, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plates. Their weapons were advanced, firing energy bolts that could cut through metal. But Danny and his squad had trained for this. They moved fast, using cover, working together. For every Marine who fell, 3 Kryn died. Up on the bridge of the Valiant, Jake watched as the human fleet accelerated straight toward the enemy. No fancy maneuvers. No clever tactics, just a direct charge into the teeth of the Kryn formation. It was the kind of attack that military academies taught students never to do. It violated every rule of space combat. But as the first human ship crashed into a Kryn dreadnought, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire, something changed. The Kryn formation hesitated. They had fought many species, conquered many worlds, but they had never seen anyone fight like this. These humans weren't trying to win in the traditional sense. They were trying to hurt the enemy as much as possible before they died. And that made all the difference. The battle raged for hours. Human ships exploded one after another, but each one took enemy vessels with them. The crew of the Valiant sang old songs as they fought, their voices carrying over the communication channels. Other ships joined in, creating a chorus of defiance that echoed through space. Amy's console showed the numbers changing. 30 human ships destroyed, but over 200 Kryn vessels damaged or destroyed. The impossible was happening. The humans were losing the battle but winning something more important. They were proving that the Kryn could be hurt, that they could be made to pay a price. That conquest wasn't easy or cheap. When the Kryn fleet finally retreated, only 9 human ships remained. But Earth was still free. The impossible had happened. Humans had fought the mighty Kryn Empire and survived. Jake looked at his crew. They were exhausted, some wounded, all in shock. But they were smiling. They had done something that would be remembered forever. They had shown the galaxy that humanity would rather die fighting than live on their knees. And somewhere out in space, on thousands of worlds, enslaved species heard the story and began to wonder. If these crazy humans could stand up to the Kryn, maybe others could too. Maybe there was hope after all. The news traveled faster than light itself. Through quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy, every civilized world heard about what happened at Earth. The humans had fought the Kryn Empire and survived. It shouldn't have been possible, but it happened. And the galaxy didn't know what to think about it. Commander Lisa Chen walked into the Galactic Council chamber for the first time. She was nervous, but she didn't show it. Around her sat representatives from 40 different species. Some looked like insects. Others resembled plants or fish or things that had no comparison to Earth life. All of them were staring at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear. The Velkari diplomat spoke first. His species looked almost human, except for the blue skin and the extra set of arms. "Commander Chen," he said, his voice formal and cold, "we have reviewed your battle records. Your tactics make no sense. You sacrificed ships that could have escaped. You took risks that had no strategic value. You fought with emotion instead of logic. Frankly, your entire approach to warfare seems designed to maximize your own casualties." Lisa took a deep breath. She had prepared for this. "You're right," she said. "By your standards, we're terrible at warfare. We don't fight the way you do. We don't calculate odds before every decision. We don't retreat when the smart thing to do is run away. You want to know why?" The council waited. Lisa could feel dozens of eyes on her. Some species had better vision than humans. Some could see heat or electricity or magnetic fields. But all of them were watching her closely. "Because we're not fighting for strategic advantage," Lisa continued. "We're fighting for our home, our families, our right to exist. And when you're fighting for those things, the odds don't matter. You either win or you die trying. There's no middle ground, no acceptable compromise. You call it emotion. We call it determination." A Sarkhan warrior, a species known across the galaxy for their military skill, stood up. He was tall and covered in scales that looked like natural armor. "I have studied human military history," he said. "Your species has fought wars for thousands of years. You have records of battles where smaller forces defeated larger ones through clever tactics and terrain advantages. You understand strategy. But against the Kryn, you abandoned all of that." "Why?" Lisa smiled. "Because the Kryn expected us to fight smart. They expected us to follow the rules. They expected us to be logical and predictable, so we did the one thing they couldn't prepare for. We went crazy. We attacked when we should have defended. We advanced when we should have retreated. We made them afraid not of our weapons but of our willingness to use them no matter what the cost. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, the Velkari diplomat spoke again. You realize that other species are watching? That your example might inspire them to rebel against the Kryn? Good, Lisa said. Maybe it's time someone stood up to them. Back on Earth, Colonel Greg Patterson was dealing with a different problem. Aliens wanted to join the human military, hundreds of them, from a dozen different species. They had come to Earth asking to be trained to fight like humans. The military bases were overwhelmed. Greg stood in front of a mixed group of recruits. There were Velkari merchants who had left their trading ships, Sarkin warriors who wanted to learn new tactics, even a few Thalaxi, a small species that had been enslaved by the Kryn for generations. They all looked at him with hope in their eyes. I'm going to be honest with you, Greg said. Training to fight like a human isn't about learning new weapons or tactics. It's about changing how you think. Every military in the galaxy teaches their soldiers to calculate risks, to weigh odds, to make smart decisions. We teach our soldiers something different. We teach them to decide what they're willing to die for, and then to fight for it with everything they have. A Velkari raised one of his 4 hands. But isn't that just suicide? Throwing away your life accomplishes nothing. Greg shook his head. We're not teaching you to throw away your life. We're teaching you to use it. There's a difference. A suicide attack is pointless death. A human attack is calculated risk taken for a valuable goal. We don't want to die. We just refuse to let the fear of death stop us from doing what needs to be done. He pulled up a video on the screen. It showed the Battle of Earth, human ships charging into the Kryn fleet. The recruits watched in silence as vessel after vessel exploded. But they also saw the Kryn formation breaking apart, saw the mighty Empire's fleet retreating. This is what we're offering to teach you, Greg said. Not how to die, but how to fight in a way that makes your enemy afraid. The Kryn have conquered 40 star systems because everyone they fought was rational. They calculated the odds and surrendered. But we didn't, and that one decision changed everything. A young Thalaxi stepped forward. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with large eyes and gray skin. My people have been slaves for 60 years, she said quietly. The Kryn took our world when my grandmother was young. We tried to fight back once. They killed millions of us as punishment. They taught us that resistance was hopeless, that we should accept our fate and be grateful they let us live. Greg knelt down so he was eye level with her. And now? Now I've seen humans fight, she said. I've seen that the Kryn can be hurt, can be beaten, and I want to learn how to do that. I want to bring freedom back to my people even if it costs me my life. Then you're already thinking like a human, Greg said with a smile. Welcome to the program. Across the galaxy, the Kryn Empire was confused. They had ruled through fear and overwhelming military force for centuries. No one had ever successfully resisted them. But now, after the Battle of Earth, something was changing. Their intelligence reports showed unusual activity on several conquered worlds. Secret meetings, whispered conversations, small acts of defiance. The Kryn military command didn't understand what they were seeing. How could defeated species suddenly find courage? What had changed? They studied the human battle recordings over and over, trying to understand, but they were looking at tactics and weapons. They didn't understand that what had changed wasn't military strategy. It was hope. On the planet Thalan Prime, a mining colony enslaved by the Kryn, a group of workers gathered in secret. They passed around a data crystal that contained footage of the Battle of Earth. They watched human ships charging into impossible odds. They listened to the war songs that human crews had sung as they fought. An old Thalaxi miner named Corvin spoke to the group. I have spent my entire life in these mines. I was born a slave. I expected to die a slave. But today I learned something new. I learned that being outnumbered doesn't mean being defeated. I learned that courage can overcome superior weapons. I learned that sometimes the most rational thing to do is to be completely irrational. What are you saying? Another miner asked. I'm saying it's time to fight back, Corvin said. I'm saying if these humans can stand up to the Kryn with 40 ships, maybe we can stand up to them with whatever tools we have. I'm saying I would rather die free tomorrow than live as a slave for another year. The miners looked at each other. Fear and hope mixed on their faces. They had lived under Kryn rule for so long that freedom seemed like a dream. But the humans had made that dream real, at least for a little while. And if humans could do it, maybe they could too. News of the first resistance cell on Thalan Prime reached Earth 3 weeks later. Lisa Chen read the report with a mixture of pride and concern. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone expected. The human example had lit a fire that was spreading from world to world. "This is what we wanted, isn't it?" her assistant asked. "Other species standing up to the Kryn?" "Yes," Lisa said, "but it's also terrifying. We've started something we might not be able to control. Revolutions are messy and bloody. A lot of people are going to die." "They were dying anyway," her assistant pointed out. "At least now they're dying for something they believe in." Lisa nodded slowly. That was the human way of thinking. Better to die fighting than to live in chains. It was a philosophy that had driven human history for thousands of years. And now they had exported it to the stars. For better or worse, the galaxy would never be the same. The Kryn garrison on Thalan Prime had 5,000 soldiers. They were well-trained, well-equipped, and confident. For 2 generations, they had controlled this mining world without serious resistance. The Thalaxi were a peaceful species, small and physically weak. They had learned long ago that fighting the Kryn was pointless, or at least they used to think that. Lieutenant Kevin Ross stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the mining colony. He had 12 Marines with him, all volunteers for what military command was calling an advisory mission. Their job was simple in theory and nearly impossible in practice. They were supposed to teach the Thalaxi how to fight back against an occupying force that outnumbered them and had vastly superior weapons. Corvin met them at the landing pad. The old Thalaxi miner looked nervous but determined. "Thank you for coming," he said in broken English. "We have 3,000 workers ready to fight. But we have no weapons, no training, no experience with warfare. The Kryn have everything." Kevin looked at the group of miners gathered behind Corvin. They were thin from years of hard labor and poor food. Most of them were scared. But in their eyes, he saw something familiar. Something that reminded him of the human crews who had fought at Earth. They had made a decision to fight, and that decision had changed them. "Good," Kevin said. "Fear is normal. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. But you're here, which means you've already taken the hardest step. You've decided that freedom is worth the risk." He gathered the Thalaxi around him. "Here's what I need you to understand. You can't fight the Kryn the way they expect. You're smaller, weaker, and you don't have their weapons. So you need to fight smarter. You need to use guerrilla tactics. Hit and run, ambush, sabotage. Make them afraid to walk through your tunnels. Make them second-guess every decision." A young Thalaxi woman named Vera raised her hand. "But they'll kill civilians if we attack them. They always do. They'll execute 10 of us for every one of them we hurt." Kevin nodded slowly. "Yes, they probably will. And that's a choice only you can make. I can't tell you that freedom comes cheap. I can't promise that fighting back won't cost lives. All I can tell you is what humans have learned over thousands of years of warfare. Tyrants rule through fear. The moment you stop being afraid, they lose their power. And yes, they'll try to make you afraid again. They'll hurt people. They'll threaten worse. But if you can push through that fear, if you can keep fighting no matter what they do, eventually they'll realize they can't win." The training started that night. Kevin and his Marines taught the Thalaxi how to make improvised weapons from mining equipment, how to set traps in the tunnels, how to communicate without being detected, how to hit targets and disappear before the enemy could respond. But most importantly, they taught them how to think like human fighters. Engineer Sophie Turner worked with a group of Thalaxi technicians. She was showing them how to turn their mining explosives into something more useful. "The Kryn think you're harmless," she said. "They see you as slaves who are too weak and scared to fight back. That's your advantage. They're not expecting you to resist, which means they're not ready for it." One of the technicians, an older male named Kelton, looked worried. "But even with these weapons, we can't defeat 5,000 soldiers. The numbers are impossible." Sophie smiled. "You're thinking like the Kryn. You're thinking about big battles and military victories. But that's not how guerrilla warfare works. You don't need to defeat their army. You just need to make it too expensive for them to stay. Every soldier they lose, they can't easily replace. Every supply convoy you destroy, they have to spend resources to replace. Eventually, the cost of holding this planet becomes too high, and they leave. The first attack happened 3 days later. A Kryn patrol was moving through one of the mining tunnels when the ceiling collapsed on them. 10 soldiers were killed instantly. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Thalaxi fighters had disappeared into the maze of tunnels they had worked in their entire lives. The Kryn commander was furious. He ordered 50 Thalaxi civilians executed as punishment. It was the standard response designed to break resistance before it could spread. But this time, something was different. The executions didn't scare the rebels. It made them angry. That night, 3 more Kryn patrols were ambushed. Supply depots exploded. Communication lines were cut. The garrison suddenly realized they were not in control of the planet. They were at war with it. Kevin watched from a meow. Hidden observation post as Vera led a team of fighters in a raid on a Kryn armory. She was small and young, barely 20 years old by human standards. But she moved with confidence now, no longer the scared miner he had met a week ago. She had found something inside herself, something that the Kryn had tried to crush but never quite destroyed. The will to be free. The raid succeeded. The Thalaxi fighters stole dozens of Kryn weapons and disappeared into the tunnels. Kevin smiled. They were learning fast. Captain Rachel Moore commanded the small human fleet that arrived in orbit 4 weeks after the rebellion began. She expected to find a desperate situation, rebels barely holding on against superior forces. Instead, she found that the Kryn garrison was trapped in their own base, afraid to send out patrols. The Thalaxi controlled most of the planet. Rachel opened communications with the Kryn commander. "This is Captain Rachel Moore of Earth. I'm here to discuss terms of your withdrawal from this planet." The Kryn commander's face appeared on screen. He looked tired and angry. "You did this. You taught these slaves to rebel. You're responsible for the deaths of hundreds of my soldiers." "No," Rachel said calmly. "You're responsible. You enslaved peaceful people and thought they would stay that way forever. We just reminded them that they have a choice. Now you have a choice too. Leave peacefully, or we'll help the Thalaxi drive you out by force." "You can't threaten us," the commander said. "Your fleet is small. We have reinforcements coming." Rachel smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Maybe, but before those reinforcements arrive, the Thalaxi are going to overrun your base. I've seen their plans. They're good plans. Plans that my Marines helped them develop. You can try to hold out and hope your reinforcements get here in time. Or you can leave now with your remaining soldiers alive. Your choice." The Kryn evacuation began the next day. The commander knew he was beaten, not by superior forces, but by an enemy that refused to stay defeated. As the Kryn ships lifted off, thousands of Thalaxi came out of the tunnels to watch. Many were crying. Some were cheering. All of them were free for the first time in their lives. Corvin stood next to Kevin as they watched the last Kryn ship disappear into the sky. "We did it," the old miner said, his voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." "Yes, you did," Kevin said. "Not because of us. We just showed you how. But you're the ones who had the courage to fight. You're the ones who decided that freedom was worth the cost. That's all you, not us." "What happens now?" Vera asked. She still carried the Kryn rifle she had stolen in that first raid. "Now you spread the word," Kevin said. "You tell other enslaved worlds what you did here. You show them that the Kryn can be beaten. You inspire them the way Earth inspired you. And slowly, planet by planet, the Empire starts to fall apart." News of the Thalan Prime liberation spread through the Kryn Empire like wildfire. Within days, rebellions started on 3 other worlds. Within weeks, a dozen more joined them. The Kryn military, which had been designed to fight conventional wars against rational opponents, found itself facing enemies who fought like humans. Enemies who didn't care about odds or casualties. Enemies who valued freedom more than safety. The Empire was starting to crack. And at the center of every crack were a few human advisors. teaching enslaved species the most dangerous lesson humans knew. That sometimes the craziest thing you can do is exactly what needs to be done. That sometimes being logical means accepting defeat, and being illogical means creating a chance to win. Rachel watched from orbit as the Thalaxi began rebuilding their world. They had suffered heavy losses. Nearly 1,000 had died in the rebellion, but they were free, and that made all the difference. She thought about Earth, about the battle that had started all of this. The price of freedom was always high, but the cost of slavery was higher. She opened a communication channel to Earth Command. Mission successful. Thalan Prime is liberated. The Thalaxi are ready to stand on their own, requesting new assignment. The response came quickly. Multiple worlds requesting human advisors. Choose your next destination and proceed. And Captain, good work. You're changing the galaxy. Rachel smiled. That was the goal. Not to conquer the galaxy like the Kryn had tried, but to free it. One world at a time. One rebellion at a time. One group of fighters at a time, learning that they didn't have to accept tyranny. That they could fight back. That they could win. The Kryn Empire was burning. Not with actual fire, but with rebellion. 17 worlds had risen up against their masters. The empire that had seemed invincible just months ago was now fighting wars on dozens of fronts. And they were losing. But the Kryn were not going to give up easily. If they couldn't control their subject worlds, they would destroy them. That was the message sent to the Korvax system, where another rebellion had started. The Kryn fleet arrived in force, 200 warships carrying enough firepower to burn the entire planet from orbit. Major Chris Bennett received the distress call on the human frigate Destiny. He was 3 systems away with a small task force of just 7 ships. The numbers were absurd. 7 ships against 200. Any rational commander would ignore the call and wait for reinforcements. But Chris had learned long ago that being rational wasn't always the right choice. Set course for Korvax, he ordered. Maximum speed. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Tony Fletcher, looked at him with concern. Sir, we can't fight 200 ships. We'll be destroyed in minutes. Probably, Chris agreed, but we can buy time. The Korvax rebels are hiding in underground shelters. If the Kryn start orbital bombardment, thousands of civilians will die. Maybe millions. We need to stop that from happening, or at least delay it long enough for help to arrive. And if help doesn't arrive? Chris smiled grimly. Then we die protecting people who deserve to be free. There are worse ways to go. The human task force dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly between the Kryn fleet and the planet Korvax. It was a tactically absurd position. They were trapped between the enemy and the planet's gravity well. They couldn't run. They couldn't maneuver. They could only fight and die. Chris opened a communication channel to the Kryn Admiral. This is Major Chris Bennett of Earth. If you want to bomb that planet, you'll have to go through us first. The Kryn Admiral appeared on screen. He looked amused. You have 7 ships. I have 200. Do you really think you can stop us? Maybe not, Chris said. But we'll make you pay for every meter you advance. And the whole galaxy will see it. They'll see that you were so afraid of unarmed civilians that you needed to murder them from orbit. They'll see that you couldn't face resistance, so you decided to commit genocide. That's the legacy you'll leave. The Admiral's amusement faded. You humans are insane. You throw away your lives for people you don't even know. For worlds that aren't yours. Why? Because we remember what it's like to be weak, Chris said. Because we remember fighting for our own freedom. Because we believe that some things are worth dying for. And because if we let you kill these people without trying to stop you, we couldn't live with ourselves. The Kryn fleet advanced. The human ships opened fire, their weapons blazing against impossible odds. The Destiny shook as enemy fire hammered against its shields. Alarms blared. Systems failed, but Chris kept his ship between the Kryn and the planet, refusing to move. One by one, the human ships were destroyed. The Valiant exploded after ramming a Kryn cruiser. The Defiant fought until its weapons melted, then crashed into an enemy destroyer. The Resolution, the Liberty, the Guardian, all gone. Only the Destiny remained, its shields failing, its hull breached in a dozen places. Chris looked at his bridge crew. They were all still at their stations, still fighting even though death was seconds away. He was proud of them. They had done their duty. They had shown the galaxy what humans believed in. And then, Like a miracle, reinforcements arrived. Not just human ships, but vessels from a dozen different species. The Thalaxi had sent their newly freed defense fleet. The Velkari had mobilized their merchant marine. Even the Sarkin warrior caste, impressed by human courage, had sent a battle group. Together, they outnumbered the Kryn. The battle turned in an instant. The Kryn admiral, seeing he was now outnumbered and facing an enemy that fought with human-style tactics, made the smart choice. He retreated. The planet Korvax was saved. Chris sat in the medical bay of a Thalaxi ship, his arm in a cast and his face covered in bandages. The Destiny had been destroyed in the final moments of the battle. He and 30 of his crew had been rescued from the escape pods. 40 others had died, but they had saved millions of lives on Korvax. Dr. Nicole Hayes, a human physician who had volunteered to work with the refugee aid programs, came to check on him. She was exhausted. For the past month, she had been moving from world to world, helping treat the wounded from various rebellions. She had seen more death and suffering than she ever imagined possible. "You're lucky to be alive," she told Chris. "Another minute, and that pod would have lost life support." "How are the others?" he asked. "Most will recover. A few are in serious condition, but the Thalaxi doctors are good. They'll pull through." She sat down next to his bed. "I heard what you did. Putting your ships between the Kryn and the planet. Buying time you didn't have. It was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid." Chris laughed, then winced because his ribs were broken. "That's the human way. Brave and stupid at the same time." Nicole's expression became serious. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been seeing on all these liberated worlds. The cost of this war is enormous. Not just in lives lost during the fighting, but in the aftermath. These worlds are damaged. Their infrastructure is destroyed. Their populations are traumatized. And we're telling them it's all worth it because they're free now. But I'm not sure they believe us." "Do you believe it?" Chris asked quietly. Nicole was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I've treated children who lost their parents in the rebellions. I've seen cities that were beautiful before the war and are now just rubble. I've held the hands of people dying from wounds we can't treat because the hospitals were destroyed. And I wonder, is this really better than what they had before?" "Yes," Chris said firmly, "it is. Not because the situation is better right now, but because now they have hope. Now they have control over their own destiny. Before they were slaves with no future except more slavery. Now they're free people rebuilding their homes. It's hard and it's painful and it costs more than anyone wants to pay. But it's worth it." On the planet below, the Korvax people were celebrating. Their city had been damaged in the battle. Debris from destroyed ships had fallen from the sky, crushing buildings. Fires burned in several districts, but they were alive and they were free. That was enough. Lieutenant Jake Foster was on his 5th mission as a resistance coordinator. He moved from world to world, helping establish communication networks between rebel cells, teaching tactics, and providing whatever support he could. He never stayed long. His job was to light the fire and let the local people tend it. He was currently on a planet called Setar, meeting with leaders of 3 different resistance groups. They were arguing about strategy. One group wanted to attack the Kryn garrison directly. Another wanted to focus on sabotage. The third wanted to wait for more human advisors to arrive. Jake listened patiently, then raised his hand. "Can I tell you about someone I met?" Her name was Vera. She was a Thalaxi miner, young and scared. When the rebellion started on her world, she was one of the first to volunteer. She didn't know how to fight. She didn't have weapons or training. All she had was a decision that she was done being a slave. The Cedar leaders listened. Vera learned fast, Jake continued. She became one of the best fighters in the rebellion. She led raids, planned ambushes, inspired others. And you know what I remember most about her? She never asked for permission. She saw what needed to be done and she did it. She didn't wait for perfect conditions or overwhelming force. She fought with what she had where she was against whoever she faced. "What happened to her?" one of the Cedar leaders asked. "She died 3 weeks after the liberation," Jake said quietly. "Not in battle. In an accident while clearing rubble from a collapsed building. She survived the war only to die helping rebuild her city. But before she died, she told me something. She said she had lived as a slave for 20 years and as a free person for 3 weeks. And those 3 weeks were worth more than the 20 years. The room was silent. "So here's my advice," Jake said. "Stop arguing about the perfect strategy. Stop waiting for ideal conditions. Start fighting now with what you have. Yes, people will die. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, you might fail, but if you don't try, you'll definitely fail. And you'll fail as slaves, which is the worst kind of failure there is. The Cedar Rebellion began that night. Across the Kryn Empire, the pattern repeated on world after world. Human advisors taught guerrilla tactics. Local fighters learned to use what they had instead of wishing for what they didn't. Rebellions succeeded or failed, but each one weakened the empire a little more. And with each victory, no matter how small, the hope spread. Dr. Nicole Hayes continued her work in the refugee camps and field hospitals. She treated wounds and delivered babies and tried to put broken people back together. It was exhausting and sometimes heartbreaking, but she kept going because she understood something important. Freedom had a cost and someone had to pay it. She was just making sure that cost was as low as possible. Major Chris Bennett recovered from his wounds and took command of a new ship. He went back to doing the only thing he knew how to do: fighting impossible battles. The war had been going on for 8 months. What started as a few scattered rebellions had grown into a full galactic uprising. 40 worlds were now in open revolt against the Kryn Empire. The mighty empire that had ruled for centuries was collapsing, system by system. Admiral Sam Cooper stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense ship Defiant, looking at the tactical display. It showed the current military situation across the galaxy. Red markers indicated Kryn-controlled systems, blue markers showed free worlds, and yellow markers showed systems where the fighting was still ongoing. There was a lot of yellow. "Admiral, the fleet is assembled," his tactical officer reported. The officer was Valkyrie, one of hundreds of aliens who had joined human military units to learn their methods. 800 ships from 20 different species. It's the largest combined fleet in galactic history. Sam nodded slowly. 800 ships. It was an impressive number. But they were going to need every single one of them. Because they were about to do something that military experts said was impossible. They were going to attack the Kryn homeworld itself. Lieutenant Maya Price, his communications officer, looked worried. "Sir, we're still getting reports from the front lines. 17 systems are under heavy attack. The Kryn are fighting back hard. Some commanders are saying we should use our forces to reinforce those systems instead of launching this offensive." "Those commanders are thinking defensively," Sam said, "and defensive thinking loses wars. Yes, we could spread our fleet across 17 systems and fight 17 separate battles, but the Kryn would just keep attacking, keep grinding us down. Or we can strike at their heart, take away their capital, their command structure, their ability to coordinate. That's how you win wars. It's also how you lose your entire fleet if the attack fails," Maya pointed out. Sam smiled. "You're absolutely right. This is the riskiest operation in human military history, maybe in galactic military history. If we fail, we'll probably lose most of our ships and the war will drag on for years. But if we succeed, the war ends. The empire falls. Every enslaved world goes free. That's worth the risk." The fleet prepared to jump to the Kryn homeworld. Sam walked through the ship talking to his crew. They were a mixed group. Humans worked alongside Thalaxi technicians, Valkyrie engineers, and Sarkin security teams. Different species, different cultures, but united by a common cause. They had all learned to fight the human way, with courage, with determination, with a refusal to accept defeat. In the Marine Bay, Sergeant Danny Walsh was checking his equipment one more time. He had survived the Battle of Earth 8 months ago. He had survived a dozen missions since then. Now he was preparing for what might be his last mission. The plan called for his team to board the Kryn Command Citadel and disable their communication systems. It was a suicide mission by any rational calculation. "How are you feeling?" Sam asked him. Danny looked up and grinned. "Scared out of my mind, sir. But ready. We've trained for this. We know what to do. And honestly, I can't think of a better way to end this war than by walking into the Emperor's palace and telling him his time is up." "You don't have to do this," Sam said quietly. "We can find another way to disable those communications." "No, sir, you can't," Danny said. "This is the best plan we've got. It's risky, but so was everything else we've done. And it's worked so far because we've been willing to take risks that the Kryn wouldn't. That's not going to change now." The fleet jumped to the Kryn homeworld. They emerged from faster-than-light travel to find exactly what they expected. 3,000 Kryn warships defending their capital. The odds were almost 4-1 against the attackers. Any military computer would say the attack had no chance of success, but the humans had stopped listening to military computers months ago. All ships. This is Admiral Cooper. Sam broadcast to the entire fleet. You all know the mission. You all know the odds. But you also know what we're fighting for. Every enslaved person in this galaxy is counting on us. Every rebel who has died fighting for freedom died believing we would finish what they started. So let's show the Kryn why you never ever underestimate someone who's fighting for their freedom. Attack! The combined fleet charged forward. Ships from 20 different species all fighting together, all using tactics they had learned from humans. They didn't try to outmaneuver the enemy. They didn't look for tactical advantages. They just attacked directly and aggressively, aiming for the heart of the Kryn defenses. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded on both sides. The Kryn had superior technology and numbers, but the Alliance had something more important. They had soldiers who believed in their cause, who fought not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to, who saw their friends die and kept fighting anyway. Commander Pete Williams led a squadron of fighters toward the Kryn Command Citadel. His job was to get Danny's Marine team close enough to board. Half his squadron was destroyed in the first 5 minutes. The rest kept going. We're taking heavy fire, his wingman reported. Shields are down to 20%. Keep going, Pete ordered. Those Marines need a ride to that citadel, and we're going to give it to them. They broke through the defensive line with 3 fighters remaining. Danny's breach pod launched, speeding toward the massive structure that housed the Kryn military command. Pete watched it go, knowing he would probably never see Danny again. Then he turned his damaged fighter around and headed back into the battle. The breach pod smashed into the side of the citadel. Danny and his team cut through the hull and entered the building. Kryn soldiers were waiting. The fight was brutal and close quarters. Danny's team had trained for this, but training and reality were different things. People died, good people, his friends, but they kept pushing forward. Through corridors filled with enemy soldiers, through security doors and defensive positions, toward the command center where the Kryn coordinated their empire's military forces. They fought not because they were winning, but because giving up wasn't an option. Outside in space, the battle raged. Sam watched as ship after ship was destroyed. The casualties were enormous, but the Kryn fleet was breaking. For the first time in their history, they were facing an enemy that wouldn't retreat, that wouldn't surrender, that kept coming no matter how many ships were destroyed. Admiral, the Kryn flagship is trying to retreat, Maya reported. Don't let it, Sam ordered. All ships focus fire on their flagship. If their command staff escapes, they can rebuild. We need to end this here and now. A dozen ships concentrated their fire on the massive Kryn vessel. Its shields held for a moment, then collapsed. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The Kryn fleet, seeing their commanding officer destroyed, began to fall apart. Ships that had been fighting in coordination suddenly couldn't communicate properly. Formation dissolved into chaos. Deep inside the citadel, Danny reached the command center. The doors were sealed and heavily defended. His team was down to 4 people. They were almost out of ammunition, but they had come too far to stop now. Plant the charges, Danny ordered. If we can't get in, we'll blow the whole place up. As they worked, the Kryn Emperor himself appeared on a view screen. He looked old and tired. Why are you doing this? He asked. Why are you sacrificing yourselves? Even if you succeed here, thousands of your people will die in this battle. Millions more will die in the wars to come. All this death for what? Danny looked up at the screen. For freedom. That's all. Just freedom. The right to live without fear. The right to make our own choices. The right to exist without bowing to anyone. You took that away from 40 different species. We're taking it back. You're insane, the Emperor said. Danny smiled. Yeah, we get that a lot. But you know what? Being sane didn't help any of the species you conquered. Being logical didn't save them. Being reasonable just made them slaves. So maybe being a little bit crazy is exactly what was needed. The charges detonated. The command center exploded. Communication systems across the Kryn homeworld went offline. Without coordination, without leadership, the defending fleet fell apart. Ships surrendered or retreated or were destroyed. Sam watched from the Defiant as the last Kryn resistance collapsed. They had won. The cost had been terrible. Nearly 300 ships destroyed, tens of thousands dead, but they had won. The Kryn Empire was finished. In the ruins of the command citadel, rescue teams found Danny and one other survivor from his squad. They were buried under rubble, badly injured but alive. Danny's last memory before losing consciousness was the feeling of hands pulling him free and a voice saying, "You did it. The war is over." 3 days later, Sam stood before the Galactic Council. The war was officially over. The Kryn had surrendered. Their empire was being dismantled. Their conquered worlds given independence. It was a new era for the galaxy. Commander Cooper, the Velkari diplomat, said, "Your tactics won the war." But they also resulted in casualties that far exceeded any rational projection. Hundreds of ships destroyed, thousands of soldiers dead. Was it worth it? Sam thought about all the people he had lost. Good officers, brave soldiers, friends. He thought about Danny recovering in a hospital, having lost an arm and an eye but still smiling. He thought about all the enslaved worlds that were now free. Yes, he said simply. 5 years had passed since the fall of the Kryn Empire. The galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. 40 worlds that had been enslaved for generations were now independent. New governments were forming. Old wounds were healing slowly. And throughout it all, humans remained at the center of galactic attention. The Academy of Human Military Studies stood on a hill overlooking the city of Geneva on Earth. It was built with funding from a dozen different species, all wanting to understand what made humans such effective warriors. The building was impressive, mixing architectural styles from different cultures. But what made it special wasn't the building, it was what happened inside. Admiral Jake Morrison, now retired from active duty, stood at the front of a lecture hall filled with students. There were humans, of course, but also Velkari, Thalaxi, Sarkin, and representatives from 30 other species. All of them wanted to learn the secrets of human warfare. "Welcome to your first day," Jake said. "I know why you're here. You've read about the Battle of Earth. You've studied the liberation campaigns. You've analyzed our tactics and strategies. And you think that if you learn how we fight, you'll become better warriors. But here's the truth. If that's all you learn here, you'll have wasted your time." The students looked confused. A young Sarkin warrior raised his hand. "Admiral, isn't the purpose of this academy to teach combat methods?" "No," Jake said. "The purpose of this academy is to teach you how to think like a warrior. Not how to fire weapons or pilot ships or plan battles. Those are just tools. What made humans effective wasn't our weapons or our tactics. It was our mindset, our refusal to accept defeat, our willingness to take risks, our belief that some things are worth dying for." He pulled up a display showing casualty figures from the war. The numbers were sobering. Humans had suffered the highest casualty rate of any species involved in the fighting. Nearly 20% of Earth's military had died during the 8-month war. "Look at these numbers," Jake continued. "By any logical standard, we were terrible at warfare. We lost more ships per engagement than any other species. We took more casualties per mission. We made decisions that military computers said were suicidal, and yet we won. Does anyone want to explain why?" A Thalaxi student spoke up. She was young, probably born during the occupation. "Because you didn't fight to minimize losses. You fought to maximize impact. You were willing to die if it meant achieving your objective." "Exactly," Jake said. "Every other species in this galaxy was taught that the goal of warfare is victory with minimum casualties." That sounds smart, right? Logical? But it creates a problem. If minimizing casualties is your top priority, you'll never take the risks needed to win decisive victories. You'll fight careful battles. You'll avoid danger. And slowly, over time, you'll lose to an enemy who's willing to take bigger risks." He changed the display to show footage from the Battle of Earth. Human ships charging into the Kryn formation, accepting certain death to inflict maximum damage. It still looked insane even 5 years later. "This is what made the difference," Jake said. "We decided that protecting Earth was more important than protecting our lives. That freedom was worth the sacrifice. That dying for a cause was better than living without one. You can study our tactics all you want, but unless you understand that fundamental principle, you'll never truly fight like a human." In another part of the academy, Colonel Greg Patterson was teaching a different kind of lesson. His class was in a simulation room, facing a virtual combat scenario. The students had been given an impossible mission: defend a position against overwhelming odds. The computer said survival probability was 2%. Most of the class was trying to find a clever solution, looking for a tactical advantage, a way to improve their odds. But one student, a Velkari named Korin, did something different. He simply ordered his virtual troops to attack the enemy head-on. "Cadet Korin," Greg said, stopping the simulation. "What are you doing?" "The mission is to defend, not attack, and you're outnumbered 10-1. You just got your entire force killed." Korin stood up. "Sir, the mission was impossible as stated. Defense would have failed. Retreat would have abandoned civilians. So I chose to attack. Yes, my force was destroyed, but I inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy. If this were a real battle, reinforcements might have arrived in time to save the civilians because I delayed the enemy advance." Greg smiled. "And that's exactly right. You understood that sometimes the best defense is a suicidal attack. You chose to die achieving something rather than live achieving nothing. That's human thinking. You pass." The rest of the class looked shocked. They had spent the entire exercise trying to find a safe solution to an unsafe problem. Korin had simply accepted that safety wasn't an option and focused on what he could achieve with his death. Across the galaxy, the influence of human military philosophy was spreading, not just in warfare but in everyday life. Species that had been cautious and risk-averse for generations were starting to change. They were taking chances, starting businesses that might fail, pursuing dreams that seemed impossible, fighting for causes they believed in. On Thalen Prime, Vera's younger sister had opened a school teaching human philosophy to Thalaxi children. The Kryn occupation had taught her people to be small, to hide, to never stand out. But the liberation had shown them a different way to live. Now she was teaching the next generation to be bold, to take risks, to refuse to accept limitations. Dr. Nicole Hayes worked at a medical research facility, studying treatments for injuries that had been considered untreatable. The Kryn medical science had been advanced but conservative. They only researched safe, proven methods. Nicole brought a human approach. Try new things. Take risks. Accept failure as part of learning. In 5 years, she had developed cures for 3 diseases that the Kryn had declared incurable. Lieutenant Kevin Ross ran a consulting firm helping newly independent worlds develop their own defense forces. His advice was always the same. Don't copy human tactics. Don't try to fight like humans. Instead, learn to think like humans. Figure out what your species is willing to die for. Then build your military around protecting those values. Make your enemy afraid not of your weapons, but of your determination. The Galactic Council had changed too. The careful, cautious approach that had dominated galactic politics for centuries was being replaced by something more aggressive. New trade routes were being established through dangerous regions. Exploration missions were being launched to distant, risky areas. The galaxy was becoming bolder, but not everyone was happy with these changes. A Kryn delegate, representing the remnants of the Empire, addressed the council one day. "You celebrate the humans as liberators," he said, "but look at what they've done. They've made the galaxy more dangerous, more chaotic, more violent. Species that used to be peaceful are now militaristic. Worlds that used to cooperate are now competing. The humans taught you to value courage over wisdom, risk over safety. And you think this is progress?" Commander Lisa Chin, now Earth's permanent representative to the Council, stood to respond. "You're right that we've made the galaxy more dangerous. But it was always dangerous. You made sure of that. The difference is that now species can defend themselves. They don't have to rely on being small and quiet and hoping you won't notice them. They can stand up and fight back." She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "You want to talk about wisdom? Here's wisdom. A galaxy where 40 species live in fear of one empire is not peaceful. It's just oppressed. A galaxy where everyone is free but some conflicts happen is better than a galaxy where no one fights because they're all slaves. We didn't make things perfect, but we made them better. And that's enough." The council voted to reject the Kryn delegates' complaint. The new galaxy, with all its chaos and risk and danger, was preferable to the old one. Admiral Sam Cooper visited the memorial on Earth that honored those who died in the war. There were thousands of names carved into black stone, humans who had given their lives for freedom. He found Danny Walsh's name there, even though Danny was still alive. It was a mistake in the records that had never been corrected. Danny found it funny. "They were in such a hurry to honor the dead, they listed some of us twice," Danny had joked when he saw it. Danny approached now, walking with a prosthetic arm and wearing an eye patch. He had become something of a celebrity, giving speeches about the war, teaching at the academy, inspiring new generations of warriors. Still visiting the memorial? Danny asked. Someone should remember them, Sam said. Not just their names, but what they fought for. Why they were willing to die. People remember, Danny assured him. Trust me. I give talks all over the galaxy. Every species knows the story of the crazy humans who fought impossible battles and won. We're legends now. Is that good or bad? Sam wondered. Danny considered the question. Both. It's good because it inspires people. It shows them that courage matters. That determination can overcome superior force. That freedom is worth fighting for. But it's bad because legends can be dangerous. Young warriors hear our stories and think being brave means being stupid. They forget that we calculated our risks. We didn't throw our lives away randomly. We died for specific goals, specific objectives. So what do we do about it? Sam asked.